Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we'll be doing another real-time portrait walkthrough. So like most of my portraits, we're starting off with a circle. This is really a sphere and it's just the top of the head, and because the portrait is facing a little bit to our left, instead of a straight line going down it, the line that would go down her face is just going off to the side. We can then also just imagine that this side of the circle is a little bit more flat. Circle right here to sort of represent that flat plane. Are now gonna cut this sphere in half, and that will be our eye line. And the space for that flat plane on the side of her head also is a good place for the ear. So I'm just lightly drawing that in now. And then very conveniently, we're just gonna start where that ear ends and lightly draw in her jaw by connecting it to where that line for the center of her face is. And then right at the center of that ear too is where we're gonna start her neck. And then the other side is gonna start right here, a bit off of her chin. And we're just gonna quickly draw in these fast details, just paying attention to where the shoulders are in the reference photo. I'm also gonna draw her hand right here, and I'm just starting with the open part of her palm and very roughly starting the outline of her glass also. But we're gonna finish that off more later. I wanna go back to her face first for now, and once I have all of these guidelines already, I always wanna start with the eyeballs first, just because it's easy for me to place. It's right at the center of that line that's cutting that initial sphere in half. And then right where that sphere ends, the very first circle, is also where the nose usually ends. So we're just gonna have this very triangular shape for the nose. When I'm drawing her lips, I'm also gonna start with the bottom of her lips so we have enough room for her chin before drawing the mouth line by starting at the corners and just leaving it at that for now. And I'm also just gonna lightly shape out her ear and her eyebrows. Eyebrows very conveniently are just right above her eyeballs. And it usually also starts from where the nose ends when it flares out, so that's why I have that line right there. And once I have placeholders for her features, I can then start to roughly draw out the shape of her hair. I want to make her hair more voluminous, and so you can see it just sitting farther from the shape that's supposed to be her skull. And I'm really just following what I see in the reference photo for this. I also, when I'm drawing the hair, I usually group them into clumps so that it's easier to start out with the direction of the strands later. And I'm just adding more details to her color right here. But now that everything has its place, we can then go back to her face and add more details to it. For now, I'm slightly shaping out her forehead to fit what I see in the reference photo. Before this, it was sort of just the default proportions of the face. Now that we're doing this, we're just gonna start following the contours of her face in the photo. I'm still using very light pencil strokes for this, although it looks a little bit darker. Just making these lines dark enough that it shows up on top of those light shadows. And when it comes to the eyes, I'm starting with the upper eyelid first, and I just find it so easy to imagine that shape draped across her eyeballs, and that's why I always advise on drawing the eyeballs first. You can see it's the same thing on the other side. It's much easier to imagine just this skin draping across that sphere rather than just starting with the eyes directly. And so once we have the initial shapes of the eyes done, we can then just start lightly drawing out her pupils. Make sure you're leaving enough room for the whites of her eyes. She is looking more off to the side right here. And then we can go ahead and start with her nose. For the bridge of it, I'm just following my initial outline, but then I also just started drawing in this little circle for the very tip of it. I think it always helps for when I position the nostrils because it always just goes around that tip, and then typically just stops in line with where the eyeline starts. So that's what I did for here. And we're just gonna darken up the bridge of her nose. Then I'm just very lightly drawing her upper lip. It doesn't really show up that much in the photo. What I'm doing right now is just shading in her eyebrows. I think I made the left one too straight. It maybe could have used a bit more arch to it, like the one on the right. But I just left it as it is, and I'm now going ahead with some of the details of her ear. Just drawing out what we'll see later. Most of the top of it is going to be covered up by her hair anyway. So when I'm drawing the glasses, I like to start with a base point, and that's where it sits on her nose. And then I'm also marking out the sides of the frames first before just roughly drawing in the shape of the actual glasses. Her hand is a whole different thing, and I do have a separate tutorial for it, but basically what this is just the center of the palm, and these circles represent the 4 fingers and their place in that palm. You want to leave out the thumb completely because it moves very independently from the rest of the fingers. But yeah, when I'm drawing fingers, it's easy with these 4 circles to imagine the fingers going off from that. It's also easier to draw them in sections. So the very first one we're not gonna see, and what we're seeing right here on her pinky is just the very tip and the second section of her finger. This ring finger we can see more of, but again, you can see that I'm dividing them into the sections really by where they are divided by the joints too. So draw the upper one first, and then the lines underneath should be curvier because there are pads of fat under our fingers that aren't at the top. The middle finger is almost the same as the ring finger, it's just going off to the side more. Her pointer finger, we don't see the first section at all, it's just the upper 2. And then once we have that, we can then start to draw in the thumb. I'm not sure if I walked you through that properly. I do have a separate video for the fingers if you guys want to see that. But yeah, that's just how I drew that. Once that's done, I'm going back to her hair, and again, because when I drew in the outline for this, I grouped it into sections depending on how they would grow from the scalp. It's easier for me now to start drawing the hair strands. It's still not completely in detail. I just want to give myself a better idea for when I'm shading. I'm also just gonna start shading now since I've had everything done, and really for her hair I want to go over almost everything, maybe leave out the highlights where the shading wouldn't touch each other, just so it's brighter right there. But yeah, basically you just want to start off building up the values by blocking in most of her hair, maybe except for the highlights. But what I'm doing is just I want to see if everything is in proportion, and before this it was kind of hard to do that. I'm also just going to do the same thing for her shirt. It's always easier for me to see if everything is right once I've started dividing them when I'm shading, so that's what I'm doing right now. Also, when you're doing this, have your pencil on its side. Don't push too much onto the paper. We just want to very lightly shade these sections out. We want to be able to leave room for the details later. I'm also zooming you guys in while I do the same thing for her pupils. Really just want to see if their place in the eyes are right. Also just slowly starting to darken up the values for her eyes. This is when I'm starting to carve out those details more. You can see I'm also darkening up her lashes right there. By the way, I had just sharpened my pencil, so this looks very dark right now. You might also want to do that, especially if you're doing the same pencil. As you go further into the sketch, just make sure you're sharpening your pencil also, so you can get darker lines. And also doing the same thing for her nose. When I'm drawing the glasses, I'm really just paying attention to what I see in the reference photo. Glasses, I think you wanna make sure that they're sitting on the same parts of the face that they are in the photo, and you don't make them too big or too small. It's easy to disregard them, but if you get them wrong, it really just throws off the rest of the photo too. I'm just slowly starting to shade out her lips right here, but not overdoing it. I'm not even gonna do the upper lip right now. Just move on to her forehead and some of the strands of her hair. I'm also starting to utilize my pencil being sharper for these darker hair strands right here. On this part, you really want to push it in just because that initial shade was already dark enough. And the same thing goes for right where her hair parts on the top of her head. Usually those hair strands are darker where they meet, so I'm trying to reflect that in my sketch. And again, you still want to make sure that you're keeping in mind the direction that the hair is growing from on her scalp. And that was why we drew them in groups to make this part easier. Her bun right here, I wasn't actually in the reference photo, but I wanted there to be something dark right there to sort of make the silhouette of her neck and her collar stand out more. So that's why I just added it. And then once that's done and some of the shading is done, I'm now gonna move on to her hands. It always helps to clean out some of the circles that we put in for the fingers, especially since it's not gonna be present in the shading. And then right here, I'm just cementing the lengths of her fingers. And surprisingly, the nails help the most in telling us the direction that the fingers are pointing, and so I'm very lightly drawing them out too. And then this right here, I'm just roughly adding the very harsh shape that the shadows of her fingers are making on her palm. It was very dark in the reference photo, and so that's how I'm drawing them. I'm just gonna make her fingers stand out more by darkening the shade of her shirt around them. Her drink, I just completely disregarded. I wish I had more details to it, but really what I did for this one is just shaded the whole thing in one swoop. The values around it is what I made darker, so it pushes out the glass more. But yeah, it really could have helped to add more details to her drink right there. And then we're almost done. I'm just now gonna lightly add more shading to her face. Make sure that your pencil is on its side right here so the shading isn't too harsh. I'm lightly adding shadow to her glasses, but in most of this, just make sure that your pencil is really not pushing too much onto the paper. You want to keep this shading light, and we don't want it to compete with the darker colors of her hair and her shirt. But that is it for this one. I actually kept it very simple, didn't add too many details to it, but I still hope it was helpful to you guys. And as usual, if you enjoy this video, I do more real-time work and videos up on my Patreon, so the link to that will be in the description. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for my patrons for supporting me, and I will be seeing you guys again very soon.